Hello and welcome to the latest webinar in the Elemental Talks program. Our topic today is the real deal, how proven solutions de-risk a project. And our session sponsored by the lovely people at Vega. Your chair for the next 60 minutes, my name is Jim McClelland. I'm founder and editor of Sust Meme, home to both the magazine and the top 500 rankings. Joining me on the panel this afternoon are Dr. Zainab Dangana, Sustainable Technology Services Manager at Waits Group, Edwin Murphy, founder Olio, the building performance consultancy, and Chris Boakes, specification sales manager with Vega, our sponsors. Hello to you all. It's all live. We have a Q&A to finish, so pop your questions in the little Q&A box, probably at the bottom of your screen. You pose them, I'll ask them, they'll answer them. So this webinar forms part of a program hosted and produced by Elemental. www.elementalexpo.com. I'll tell you a little bit about them. It's the online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air, and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. You can find a full diary of events on the website, range of upcoming webinars. You can also now view the back catalogue, broad range of hot topics, all available on demand. Great who's who list of speakers, and everything is free to access, I hasten to add. There's some in-depth interviews, longer form articles on the pulse, and one I've just penned myself, published this week, Robots at Work Beneath Our Feet. Do check it out. Lots of lockdown infotainment for you to enjoy. So, by way of a very brief intro from myself, sustainability, risk, and authenticity. So, we all understand the ability to manage risk on a project is critical to ensuring sustainable outcomes. That applies for building design, engineering, construction alike. Whether working on a high-rise residential or retrofit commercial, this applies not just to the traditional metrics of delivery on time and budget, but ongoing performance in use, asset value, ultimately end user satisfaction. So how can specifiers be sure to get what they want on a job? Well, with a focus on building services, this webinar will discuss how all aspects of a system or solution, product performance, third-party certification, supply chain traceability, on-site installation skills, they're all connected in quality. So any opportunity to de-risk a project without compromising on aesthetics or economics is a potential differentiator for a supplier or a subcontractor. This is why authenticity matters. So, as we start to explore how we can both scale and de-risk specification of sustainable technology and products, I'd like to begin by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves, explain their perspective, and share some opening insights. So briefly, who are you? Where do you fit into the puzzle? Where is the market right now in terms of confidence in sustainable solutions and delivering on expectations? So first up, from the perspective of innovation in contracting and property services, Zainab, where are we now?
Thank you very much, Jim. I'm Dr. Zainab Dangana from the Waits Group, and we are a leading privately owned construction development and property services company. And we work with a range of customers across the public and private sectors. And I lead and manage the Waits Sustainable Technology Services at the group. And our aim is to connect providers of market-ready sustainable technologies with building users and owners or customers who are looking for these solutions. And we play the role of a facilitator or a catalyst to accelerate the transition to net zero buildings. And also, at the other side, is to support the providers of these products or suppliers and help these businesses build back better and greener. And as a business, we do understand that we are in a climate crisis, and the construction industry, as we all know, is responsible for about 50% of carbon emissions. And as a business, we are committing to reducing our own impact, and we have launched our own ambitious environmental targets to achieve zero carbon, zero waste, and making a positive impact by 2025. And as a result, we've launched an initiative just about 3 weeks ago called the Waits Innovation Network, which is about supporting users in the industry connect directly with suppliers of sustainable innovations. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from what the others have and sort of how we can really accelerate the transition to net zero and support suppliers out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Zainab, and a great platform for innovation. And Eddie, over to you as an expert focused on the actual performance, the proof in the pudding. Where are we, Eddie? I think you might find your mute.
There you go.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Where do I fit in? Well, I mean, professionally, I'm a chartered building services engineer. I've only ever worked in the design consultancy. In 2016, I left the world of big practice after a 30-year career that spanned white, young, green, Arab, and latterly a directorship at Mott MacDonald. And I guess that I kind of wanted to start a practice, which I call Olio, the Building Performance Consultancy. I suppose I was being influenced by Bill Bordas, Adrian Lehman, maybe even sort of Mark Ray. I called it Olio because it's spelled out 0 to 10. So if you kind of take the words of Olio, sort of 0 to 10, you kind of get that. And essentially that's kind of, effectively I wanted to call it that because I was really interested in this first 10% of time on a project as being perhaps the most important 10% of time. So in essence, we're a consultancy that specializes in that first project design, brief developments, maybe design concept aspects of, well, architecture and building services design, I would say, particularly when it comes to getting to low carbon. So, and our kind of understanding there is that if you leave that period, that first 10% of design, going in the wrong direction, then you're really never going to get the project back on track again. And I guess that's kind of why sort of Olio came about. You might say the kind of idea of why we actually decided, why we kind of got that interest. Well, that came after a project that we did at Mott MacDonald called Vulcan House. It was well, I suppose it was actually Sheffield's first BREEAM excellent building. I think it was number 2 as far as BREEAM was concerned, right back in 2007 when we actually did it. So so when we kind of got a PhD student to have a look at it, she went in, she basically found that the building itself, even though we'd won major awards for it, over 50% of the occupancy of the building actually felt that this building just wasn't for them. It wasn't right for them. And so we kind of wondered, where do we go from here? So after kind of a long sort of POE exercise, we've ended up now developing methodologies that actually help users to get to buildings that they actually want. And so I guess that's where I fit into the picture.
Perfect, thanks, Eddie. And Chris, market leading product solutions and systems provider, what's your take?
Thank you, Jim. Well, my name's Chris Boakes. I'm Viga's specification sales manager for the north of England. For those that are unaware, Viga are an established manufacturer and supplier of innovative installation technologies aimed at the plumbing market specifically. My specific role at Viga is to support specifiers and clients with selecting appropriate technologies and embedding them into their design. So we're very much at the forefront and the front line of introducing innovative products to the market and embedding them, as I say. Now, I would argue that there is plenty of innovation available in the market. However, it's fair to say, a mixed approach to adoption. The area of specification I'm very passionate about, and I think where there's a real opportunity, is the opportunity for us to engage with specifiers at an early design stage. I think that's crucial in integrating quality systems, quality innovations into the design and carrying that through the project. I have a very good recent example of that where we worked with a major house builder. The project is live right now on a major residential project in southwest London. The engagement with us as a manufacturer and the client started a couple of years ago, and we were able, through that engagement with the client, to fully understand customers' needs and the issues they were designing against. And so designing in a very bespoke and holistic solution into the design meant that we could carry that through to site, educate the contractor on site through site training. And I thought it was a perfect example of a manufacturer and a specifier engaging at early stage to carry that quality through rather than attempting to get involved in the project at a later stage, be it site or tender stage, whereby which it's difficult to influence spec. I think the challenge for us is to scale that innovation and adoption of innovation across the wider industry.
Excellent, yeah. And in many of the webinars we're running, it's about scaling the innovation we have, as well as adding more, but it's about scale. And also, as you say, you know, in many cases, those bolt-on solutions that people, sustainability-wise, that they try to tack on at the end of a project often fail to realize the kind of gains they hope. And it's that early doors engagement which can make all the difference. And in a way, nicely, shall I say, but nastily, if you like, it leads me onto the middle section of our debate, where I actually want to look at those challenges and conflicts. I really want to dig a bit into when things don't go as well or as fast or as successfully as we hope. So zooming in, the challenging issues, why things are not mainstreaming, sustainable tech solutions and systems, what are the barriers to uptake and growth? So in short, what's the problem? Innovation scale, cost, culture, skills, standards, what needs to change to make it happen? So Eddie, first up, bluntly, when performance disappoints, Eddie, what is more likely to be the root of the problem? Unrealistic expectations or an inappropriate specification? So what's more likely to be at fault, expectations or specifications?
Well, I mean, for me, Jim, definitely it's managing expectations is a massive part of it. But what I'd say is really lacking more than anything else is this idea of having a common understanding by all stakeholders. And when I mean, all stakeholders, I mean right away from users to clients to architect, design team, constructors and operators, right away across the board, everybody being literally on the same hymn sheet about what it is that we're actually going to build and how we're actually going to do it. I mean, I think it's fair to say that the construction industry, if you kind of just have a look at what it does, I mean, it's awesome in its ability and its stretch and reach. Yep. I mean, we only have to have a look at, massive big projects around the world. I mean, be it, the Burj Al Khalifa, the Channel Tunnel, Wembley Stadium, Crossrail, all of these projects, fabulously spectacular projects. But our problem has never been not knowing how to build. We're very good at understanding how we should build. Our problem is always coming to that, forming that common opinion on what to build. And so it's when we kind of have that top to bottom understanding by all stakeholders of what we are building and why we're actually building it. If we don't have that, then that's when problems actually start to happen. So I would say that I mean, I don't know of any industry, and I think all of us who work in it kind of begin to wonder, when a client is about to make a project, a purchase for a massive project, we're probably the only industry that actually says, well, we don't really know what it is, but we've got a bit of an idea. We don't really know what it's going to look like, but we've got a bit of an idea. We don't really know what features it's going to have, but don't worry, we've got a bit of an idea. So we're not actually we're building products that people don't know how to use, how much they're going to cost, or even when they're going to get it. And I don't know any other industry that actually behaves in that way. And I mean, for me, I think it's absolutely bonkers. So to know what to build means that you really do have to get all of those stakeholders in the room. And I would say, with the view to getting them in the room to form that common understanding of what it is we're going to do and how we're actually going to achieve what it is that this client wants at the end of it. So I think with everybody in the room, we kind of need to define what the architect is going to design, what value the product is going to bring, who's actually going to extract that value from the product once it's actually up and running, and what's really required. And I think much more crucially is what's not required, because too often we actually build things that actually put in things that we actually feel the client, when they actually get the build and think, well, I think it could have been a bit different to that. So what I'm saying is, with this common understanding of what to build and why, we can then move on to ask the question about what quality we actually need this thing to be built to. And then once we understand what the quality is, then we can actually start to move on to that, from there to what the cost of the product actually needs to be. So getting costs down, but keeping quality high, ultimately within our industry means addressing this old chestnut of waste. We have to be and we are one of the most wasteful industries even when we've actually developed lean construction methodologies, we are being 25% efficient. So I think, so for me, I think that's where the essence of a lot of the problems that we have in the industry are. And it's because we're so poorly organized, if you like, that we struggle then in addressing the bigger problems that the industry has, which is sustainability, climate change, health and well-being, even now the pandemic.
Excellent, thanks. And I think often there's that old adage of start with the end in mind, but I think construction sometimes the end is not the end. The end is handover, that's completion, right, when they give the keys, and yes, that's not the end for the building, of course. So we're in danger of finishing several meters before the line, if you like, and I think that's one of those cultural challenges for the sector as a whole. So Chris, quality, when it does fall short, what causes that? Is it cost cutting by clients, contractors, skimping on the spec, lack of product standards, installer skills gap? Where does it go wrong, Chris?
Well, I think in theory, the industry and stakeholders remain as keen as ever to embrace innovation and innovative products. But in practice, be it due to commercial pressures, budget constraints, I think the prevalence of a VE culture can and does lead to a variation in quality on site, undoubtedly, and sometimes a compromising of product standards. And even as products and technologies become established across the industry and accepted across the industry, we see the range of manufacturers that enter the market become much broader, and as a result, the quality of technology become much more varied. So I think there's a responsibility, firstly, on us as a manufacturer to supply the highest quality products into the market, and more importantly, communicate those benefits to the market. I think there's responsibility on engineers, specifiers to be open to engaging with manufacturers, and obviously there's a responsibility on contractors to remain open and install these technologies to be set up to operate at their best ability. And in our experience, those stakeholders that are the most agile and are the most open to innovation see the benefits. Of course, regulation standards can drive and push forward innovation. We see multiple occasions of that happening, where changes in standards in regulations can drive innovation, and those manufacturers that are able to be agile can turn around innovations that are then adopted far more swiftly. But I think, as it goes back to my previous point, the earlier we can get involved in the design process to drive that quality through, rather than being engineered out at a later stage. Excellent,
thank you. And the word communication's already come up, and we're seeing a bunch of questions also popping up in front of us, and I encourage the audience to type in their questions in the Q&A button and send them through, and we'll pick up as many as we can at the end. So Zainab, communication then, as a solutions broker, you are effectively the interface between the client and the tech typically. So where's the communication breakdown? Is the buyer not listening, or is this the seller not talking their language?
I think it's a combination of both, actually, James. So, and I like sort of what Eddie said about having all the stakeholders in the room. I think that's a problem we tend to have, because on a project, even within companies, we tend to have multiple stakeholders that are involved in making that decision, and they range from the key account director that is looking at a product from a client's perspective. We have the design managers that are looking at the look and feel. We have the project managers that are looking at cost, and we have quite a few others. And what really tends to happen is when we're looking at innovative products, although they've got a common objective, but they tend to argue among themselves, and they're never able to get past that decision-making process. And I like what Eddie said, I'm repeating it again, about getting all the stakeholders in the room, but it's more than that, because it's also about how do we engage with them in a way that we can get a consensus. And that's sort of an area that I work very closely with our customers and even with projects team. And we've got a very structured decision support framework where we engage with the project team, try to understand what's important, so everybody's views are taken on board. And based upon that, we then score our suppliers. So that has worked well, because everybody's on board, everybody has been heard. The other thing I like that Chris mentioned, and I think is very important, is the early involvement, because most of these products, they need to be considered at the very early design stage. And if they're not, then it's too late. So those discussions need to happen very early on. But going back to your question where you were asking where the problem is, I think the problem is there's a gap between the supply side and the demand side. So from the demand side, we've seen a huge interest from our clients asking us for sustainable innovations. And this is due to the government UK targets, mandatory, voluntary, legislation, policies that are out there that are driving us to achieve the net zero target. Also the rising price of energy, the wider benefits of sustainable technologies, such as improving health and well-being, improving the asset value, and having a general, positive impact on the environment. And what's interesting is that there are no shortages of market-ready products. In fact, they are there. But the uptake has been very, very low. And this is due to a lot of perceived barriers due to upfront costs, uncertainties, risk, multiple stakeholders like we talked about that are involved in the decision-making process and never really get past it. And as a result, really, surprising, but over 90% of market-ready products never, ever get over the line. And this is because it's not that the products are not good, but they never really get in front of the right decision maker. And from the suppliers, point of view, they've developed this brilliant, product. They know it works, and they're just looking for a test bed. They're looking for the key decision maker. And I identified this gap very quickly, that we've got clients, project teams asking for sustainable innovations, but they do not know where to go. They consider it as a complex decision-making problem. On the other side, we've got suppliers that have got this brilliant product and they're crying out for a platform or for some kind of engagement so that they can reach out to key decision makers. And that's sort of an area that I've been working very, very closely with both, parties to try to sort of create that platform as a broker, as a facilitator, and get those discussions going. And as an industry, if we are to achieve the net zero target, which is sort of there, it's important that we nurture and support these providers of our sustainable innovation. And also, they need to be implemented at large scale if we are to see the ambitious targets that have been set. And therefore, this is a project I've been working on since 2011. And in 2017, we launched this as an initiative within WAITS called the WAITS Sustainable Technology Services. And it was to bridge this gap between the supply side and the demand side and see how we could accelerate the uptake of sustainable innovations, and also to accelerate the transition to net zero. And we've got a very structured process. So we've tried to demystify the process because there are perceived barriers. Our customers, project teams are not sure which products are credible. So we take suppliers through a screening process to be sure that they're credible. And once they've been approved by our team of experts, we then include them as our innovation partner. And we currently have about 45, and these range from simple retrofit products to building materials, to optimization and general sustainable products. And I work very closely with these suppliers to promote them in bids because early opportunities are very important and that's where we can make an impact. But also what we do is we do what we call the famous Green Dragon Den events, because the suppliers bitterly complain they never get in front of the right decision makers. And therefore, we've created that platform where we give suppliers the opportunity to pitch directly and they're scored and prioritized. And this has resulted in about circa 1 million sales for our suppliers. And this has also created environmental and operational savings for our clients. But I would stop there, but if anybody wants to know more about the products and sort of the savings we've achieved, I'll come back to that.
Great, thanks. And that's proper win-win for client and supplier or alike. Excellent. And so more uplifting, we're moving then on to the positives and the hopes. We've looked at some of the challenges and why it can be difficult. So reasons to be cheerful in terms of the approaches to technology systems installation that can de-risk projects, can reassure markets, meet or exceed expectations. Chris, if I come to you first, how can proven solutions take the pressure off the specifiers and effectively make their job easy?
Well, I think we've been talking a lot about innovation and innovative solutions. Ultimately, innovation and most innovations take the benefit of experience and direct experience. And speaking on behalf of Viga, direct feedback from our customers who are either installing products or specifying products. Whilst there understandably could be nervousness about the adoption of new technologies on projects, I think there should be confidence. Most of the innovations that Viga supply into the market are designed to automate processes, to make them easier, to make them safer, and that provides a greater consistency in quality and installation. Also, the advancements in technology in terms of product performance monitoring should give peace of mind, I think, to specifiers. And specifiers can look to manufacturers with proven track records of innovating products and introducing products to the market with some reassurance that when they're introduced to site, they'll perform as they should do. There are, of course, as products evolve and technologies evolve, there are enhanced technical safeguards designed into products to make them more reliable than ever before. And I think it's exciting. Also, the collaboration involved in projects can only improve. I think this environment we're now in can only improve with more collaboration between stakeholders. With tools like BIM, as a good example, allow us as a manufacturer to get involved in the design process far earlier and far easier than maybe we could before, and embed that technology into a project that maybe was more difficult to do before the advent of platforms and tools like BIM. So we're seeing more and more contractors and specifiers adopting our technologies and seeing the benefits of adopting that innovation. And I think going back to Eddie's point, which is a really good point, where we're looking to develop is our engagement with end users, because ultimately those are the people that can be living and working in the buildings of tomorrow. The lifelines that we supply into those buildings need to be of the highest quality. Excellent.
Some very nice points there. And I do think the digital platforms that potentially allow us to make real this collaborative ethos. It's interesting, I think, particularly for construction, because of course, historically, it was pretty adversarial. Collaborative approaches were not the way things got done. So I think, of course, the data and the technical side of the digital revolution, if you like, is exciting, but the cultural change that it potentially enables, I think, is also very interesting for more traditional industries that maybe have a little bit of a journey to go in that respect. So some nice points there. And Zainab, I think I've got a question for you about net zero targets, and we've also had a question come in. So I think I'm going to try and stitch those two together a little bit early, because otherwise we're going to miss out. So I was going to ask you about net zero targets. Can sustainability drive both demand and supply? And somebody's asked a question along similar lines. Net zero ambitions, have they slowed or streamlined the specification process? So I guess taking them both together, net zero, is it helping or hindering things to actually happen?
I think it's accelerating it, because it's coming more like a stick rather than the carrot from the government. And this has been happening for 1 or 2 years now. So we had the minimum energy efficiency standards, which was launched 2018, that any building that was going to be rented needed to have a minimum rating of E, and failing to do that, it would be unlawful. And there are quite a few other legislations that are coming up. There are things around health and well-being, that you've got to have certain air qualities and stuff like that. So I think it's more a driver rather than sort of putting people off. But obviously, I guess the problem still is that people are reluctant. They are not sure whether these innovations are going to work. So it goes back to, let's give these suppliers an opportunity to prove that they work, because 5 years down the line, we see the product there, and what my customers say is that, oh, I'm sure that product was never really good, and that's why it never really took off. But then I turn around and I tell them that, did you really give that supplier an opportunity? Because maybe that's just what they were looking for. And had you given them that opportunity, they would have been, mainstream. So I think we all need to work together and sort of help the, suppliers. And like I said, we need to nurture them, because we need them if we're going to achieve the net zero target.
Excellent, thank you. And I think there's an interesting alignment potentially between more corporate parts of some of the client businesses who are very focused on targets and in a nice way know where they want to get to, but not necessarily how to get there. And the engineering and architectural and specification and procurement sides of their business, perhaps, who know the detail, but don't necessarily talk the language that will help knit it together, you know. So I think it's interesting in terms of how we actually make the journey happen on the map between the 2 points. So finally then, before we go to Q&A and take a few more, Eddie, so future gazing, what might success look like for truly building back better?
Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about technology today, and maybe have, you know, some of it, and I do think there's a part for technology as part of the fix. But I think, you know, we can actually make this a lot simpler. If we kind of accept that, you know, what I said earlier about, you know, that we're kind of not very good at understanding what we need to do. So what we really do need to do is actually just to change our thinking about how we actually implement all of it. So I mean, as an industry, you know, we're still wedded to, you know, the old style project management techniques of Gantt charts and Taylorists, you know, all of this kind of stuff that started in the beginning of the 21st century. Sorry, the beginning of the 20th century, and here we are at the beginning of the 21st century, and we're still using, you know, pretty much the same methodologies, even though our industry is changing and the whole of society, you know, is changing absolutely rapidly. So I mean, and you only have to go back to, you know, the tragedy of the Grenfell Tower, when Judith, you know, Hackett went in, asked to report on Grenfell Tower as an outsider to our industry, and she went in, and I think she was struck not so much more by the fact that, okay, there were design teams and architectural teams and, you know, contractual failures. She was much more struck by the culture of this industry and how ineffective we are in actually managing our affairs. So what I would kind of hope for a future industry, and which I really feel is on the cusp now, is that we begin to catch up with other industries and who kind of are doing things in a little bit better way than we're doing at the minute. And maybe one of those, and this probably answers a bit of one of the questions that came up. One of those industries that I think is actually doing things better than any other at this minute in time is the tech industry. We only have to look at it just to see how much, you know, in terms of, you know, the capitalization of those industries is 5 of the world's richest individuals on the planet are related to the tech industry. And the reason that they are so good at what they do is because they are so good at connecting the customer to the product and eliminating waste all the way down the line, you know, in between. And that's what we as the construction industry need to start to get used to doing it. So we need to find out what customers want and involve them as part of, you know, and the user, involve them as part of the design process, not push them away, which is what we've been kind of doing up to now, and to start to design, you know, products that are not just the lowest possible cost, but are actually the lowest optimal cost, you know, for the customer themselves. So I would like to think that the future is one where we actually do begin to ditch these Prince2 methods, embrace this 21st century technology. And that's to say, and that's technology that, you know, that way of thinking, if you like, is already out there. And we just need to bring some of that into ours. And we have got things like, you know, methodologies like Scrum and Last Planner and TACT. And there's a lot of these have been used and been trialed now, particularly on the west coast of the States at the minute. They're actually seeing the benefits. They're building twice the amount of stuff that we're doing in half the time at literally half the cost. And I think all of that then would allow us to do a lot of the things that Chris has just talked about, which is about innovating, about being able to scale, about being able to address low carbon and have the headroom and the cost headroom to actually do all of that stuff. And so hopefully then maybe help us to just build back better, which is kind of what we all really want to do. Excellent,
thanks Eddie. And yeah, and I think tech is a very interesting example because in the last few years, Silicon Valley has got quite excited about energy performance and saving. There's a lot of innovation coming out on the tech side related to energy, which is in many respects a close cousin to a lot of what we're doing in buildings, really, in many senses. But you know, in cultural terms, I think the phrase is something like fail first and fail fast for tech, because you have to get your prototypes out and you have to get in there because you know that once you finesse things, you're going to be first to market. that's not really the kind of language that construction or the built environment can relate to. You know, fail first and fail fast. That is not going to be an easy sell around the table. So I think there are some quite interesting discussions potentially to follow. Speaking of which, then it's Q&A time. We're opening matters up to the floor. We've got a few, one or two we've already seen. We've answered. Keep your questions coming. As I said, you pose them, I'll ask them. Zainab, Eddie and Chris will answer them. I've got a couple coming on Twitter as well, but maybe, so if we take, you've picked up the net zero question, Zainab, and you've sort of given an example of leading the way in specification quality there, Eddie. We have a question from Paul Dryden here, who, and it's just disappeared from my screen, but he was asking basically, how do we stop subcontractors changing the specification, and how do we ensure that actually what's discussed in design terms ends up in the building? I don't know, maybe I invite you each to comment on that, although it has disappeared off our screen now. But Chris, maybe you could comment a little on there's all the good intentions, especially at design and engineering stage, but we all know that often when the bean counters come in, as they're called, things change, or they just go with favored or preferred suppliers. Business as usual and bean counters can often effectively change the spec before we end up in the building. So I wonder if you had a comment on how we can avoid that kind of compromise happening.
Yeah, well, it's not obviously not easy to do, as you say. In practice, we see this time and time again. But I think it goes back to a point I was trying to make earlier regarding early engagement. There's a responsibility on us as a manufacturer not to neglect the design stage for a project and look to fully understand the client's needs, the end user's needs, the specifiers' needs, and find the appropriate technology, find it in to complement the other tech on site. And the more we do that and look to embed it into the project and complement and interact and communicate with the other technology on site, I think it becomes far harder then to engineer out of a project, value engineer out of a project at a later stage. I think it needs to become a bespoke solution to the project as opposed to a commodity product that can be very, very easily engineered out. So I think it's really in that early engagement, early understanding of the project and providing bespoke solutions to suit the project.
Excellent, thanks. And I now see the text of the question better. And I know Zainab will be wanting to comment because she's already partly typed an answer, but in full, Paul did ask. He did sort of say, in my experience, we design well, but allow installers to have a race to a bottom line. Should all projects revert back to traditional contracts? How do we stop this specification downgrade, if you like? Zainab, you've already said it's about raising awareness. Perhaps you'd like to comment a bit further.
Yes, I was also going to say that was why your question disappeared.
I know.
When I answered it, it went there. Sorry about that.
No.
Yes, I didn't know if it was picked up by the others. So yes, I think the problem that I've faced is that people on the project do not appreciate sort of the added value that these products could bring. And what they look at, unfortunately, is the higher upfront cost. But what we try to do is to say, look, don't look at it as just that, but look at the wider benefit. And I'll give you an example. So we had installed some water-saving toilets, and they actually cost us quite a bit to install it. But they have actually saved us quite a bit, and the return on investment was just sort of 3 years. And these are, toilets that have got a low water flush, and they use just 1.5 liters. And the first thing everybody was like, oh God, this is going to be expensive and all that. And I'm like, don't look at it short term. You need to look at it long term. And what are we going to get out of it? So now that we've had it for a while, we only installed 27, but the toilets have saved us 87% in our water usage.
Wow.
The payback was just slightly over 3 years, and they are saving us 5 million liters of water, and currently about 13 grand in savings in our water usage. So it's a lot, and I think it's very important that if you've got a product, you make them understand. And I think it's a challenge, and I do understand that suppliers don't get that opportunity to really tell the end user the benefits or what the long-term things might be. And it's a shame because people are very, short society, and they only look at the cost and not, beyond that. So I think that needs to change.
Yeah, excellent. Good, nice point. And I know from, I'll judge on some water awards particularly, and I did some work with Marks and Spencer around trying to roll out innovation across their stores. As you say, the payback for some of these is incredibly short. We are talking, some of them are just between 18 months and 3 years. Really, we are talking fast, so yeah, it's not a wait 10 to 20 years scenario necessarily, especially perhaps with some of the water issues. And I think I've got a couple of questions come through via Twitter as well. I've got one here for Eddie. It says, performance in use. Obviously the pandemic has rewritten a lot of occupancy expectations, etc. How important is agility, flexibility, responsiveness in uncertain times?
I think we're kind of finding now that we're in the midst of this pandemic, and our whole relationship with buildings has completely changed in all of that time. So now we are actually, I suppose, moving into realms where the user, the public at large, really start to see the value of their buildings. And I think now it's for the industry to actually try to catch up and make that connection, with the users themselves. And unfortunately, traditionally, it's probably not something that we're not that adept at. I mean, we're used to kind of dealing with, as an industry, we're very good at dealing with the technical aspects of things and how to actually deliver. What we're not that good at is understanding what happens to this product after the point of delivery, and how the product actually adds value to users, and how users can actually extract value.
Yeah.
Well, now we're at that decision point, because of what's happened, where users now really do need to know much more fundamentally what's the value of an office per se. When you've got everybody working at home, is the office useful anymore? If we are having an office, how do we actually extract the value of that? So I think the question is a very pertinent one, but I'm not actually sure that as things stand at the minute, the industry per se has an absolute answer to it, purely because of the way that we're configured, to operate. And so this I guess is more reason why, things like post-occupancy evaluation, connecting post-occupancy evaluation to pre-occupancy, and thinking much more fundamentally in that sort of that first 10% of time that I talked about. These are the things that we really need to get much more used to doing if we are going to help customers to get over, and to adapt in the way in which they actually need to things like pandemics and healthy buildings and low and zero carbon, all of those kind of things that we need to do in the future.
Excellent, thank you. And I've got, I know Zainab's keen to comment on a question. I've got a couple more. One come from LinkedIn and one from Twitter. The one on LinkedIn, actually, they want to remain anonymous because they are they're watching this webinar when they perhaps should be doing something else. So they're not going to give out their name, which, okay, fair enough. I will not disclose who you are, and but thanks for tuning in. So, and it's actually for Chris. It says, takes time to bring innovation to market, even for an established brand. Is this a good thing because of checks and balances, or is it a bad thing and a real negative for entrepreneurship in our industry? So the fact it takes time to bring innovation to market, is that good because it's safe, or bad because it's just slow and out of touch?
I think much depends on what the innovation is. As speaking on behalf of Viga, as mentioned earlier, we're very experienced in bringing innovations to market and have been for the last 120 years or so. And I think we would always approach the development of a product and the introduction of a product to market with caution. We would ensure that it has the appropriate approvals, that it's been tested accordingly and is fit for purpose. So if it takes 2 years, 5 years to develop a product and get it market ready and fit for purpose, that's the period of time it takes. The adoption of that technology is probably then the more pertinent question as to, once it's ready and market ready, how quickly we can familiarize the market with it and encourage adoption of it.
Okay, so yeah, because sometimes, especially for startups, it's that lag, isn't it? They've put all their energy and investment into getting the thing market ready, and they almost don't have the time or the money to then do the big promotion and communication and get out and get in front of people, or they don't have the opportunity and access, as Zainab was saying earlier. So they have the thing, but that nobody knows about it, and therefore they don't have the sales which they potentially need for their next round of funding. So Zainab, I think you put a note on that, the question about what sector leads the way for specification quality, mainstreaming, bottom line, and also keeping clients happy, and which sector has most room for improvement. You said you're going to answer this question live, it says.
Oh.
So, so which sector do you think leads the way, or which sort of clients do you think are most receptive to sustainable technologies, and maybe which other areas are pretty late to the party?
Yes, so because Wade's sort of work with a wide range of clients for the design, construction, and maintenance of buildings, and where I've had a lot of success is with the FM part of the business.
Right.
So it has been easier to take products and solutions to them because their job is to maintain the buildings, to keep them sustainable, to keep the energy and operating costs low. So they understand what it is to keep the operating costs low. But on the other side, when we are working with teams that are involved in the construction part, they are looking more at the CapEx. And because they wouldn't be managing that building, they wouldn't be looking. So again, it depends upon the products we have. So we've had a lot of success with FM type of products, more retrofit products that we could take to a client anytime and say, oh, there's a little adapter you could put onto your existing tap. And as far as it's compatible, it's going to reduce you 50% water usage. Or there's a heating additive you could put into your wet heating system. So there are things that if they are really interested, they could use it. It's not like the design aspect that they've gone too far and it's too late to make any changes. So I would say from my own experience, it's more the FM part of the business, or people responsible for the operating cost or maintaining of the buildings that would be interested in sustainable products. Or if you are working at the early stages, try and find out who is going to be managing that building, because they would be interested in how to keep the operating cost low. So is whoever is going to be managing that building or the end user that could help.
Excellent, thank you. And I've got a question also for you, Zainab, via Twitter. So it says, the innovation partners, you're endorsing sort of picking winners. So the benefits for your clients must outweigh the risk to the Waits brand. So in other words, if you're prepared to put your name on it effectively by saying you sort of endorse, or you have audited, or you have validated up to a point, clearly you must be confident that the benefits to your clients far outweigh any gamble you're taking by putting your badge on it. Is that fair?
Yes, yes. And we do understand that somebody's got to take the lead. And like I said, there's that gap. Over 90% products are not getting implemented. And like Chris said, obviously a lot of suppliers spend about 5 or 6 years, but it's the adoption and the implementation that really makes it happen, for these suppliers. And if it doesn't happen, then they die in the valley of death. So we do a bit of due diligence. What we don't do is actually physically test any of these products. So when they do come, we have experts that sit on the panel, and this consists of people internally as well as externally, and they help us to screen and vet the products. And this is basically based upon the case studies that are shown to us. And also the way we engage with our clients is slightly different. So we do what we call the green dragon den that I mentioned about. So the customers come and hear for themselves, and they decide that, oh, actually they do like this product and they would like to trial it, and it's up to them to decide. So it's not as if we are putting it as a specification, but we're taking the customers or the end users on a journey and educating and raising the awareness of the products. So the risk is a bit less there compared to if we were to include it in our own specification. But yes, we are confident from what we are seeing, and we are happy to endorse them. And that's why we take them through that screening process.
Right, thank you. We've got time just maybe for a couple of last questions. If anybody wants to pop them in the Q&A box, or by all means via Twitter, and I'll try and pick them up. I was just going to follow up on a couple of things that have been said Eddie, I wondered if I could ask you a little bit of something in terms of performance and use and post-occupancy and evaluation things. Often, if you follow the money, then those involved in building the building aren't financially incentivized to make sure it works the way they said. Not necessarily, you know, so although reputationally, the kind of thing you described where a survey's done and lots of occupants say they don't like it or they find it difficult or whatever, often there isn't actually a penalty financially, or there isn't, you know, so in terms of incentivizing, it's very crude, but a lot of the payments have been made and done. And how are we going to change that kind of carrot and stick incentive to make them more responsible for how the buildings deliver?
Well, I mean, in truth, you know, there's absolutely no incentive for a client, you know, to want, or even for a contractor or an architect, to want to do a post-occupancy evaluation on their buildings. As a matter of fact, I think REBA were the first ones to actually think about, you know, doing post-occupancy evaluation on buildings and going back to find out, you know, whether there was anything wrong, and they promptly dropped it, and only recently putting it back. But when it came out at first, they dropped it, and they dropped it because, you know, clients were actually using it as a stick to beat the architect over, to say, listen, you've gone back, you've done a post-occupancy evaluation on my building, you found X, Y, and Z wrong with it. Now, can you please go ahead and, you know, fix it? And of course there was no money, and you know, and I suppose a legal implication that was kind of built up because of the fact that post-occupancy, it was being done. So what post-occupancy has to be is actually part of a process that a client agrees at the very beginning of a project that it is something that they really want to do. So ultimately, I mean, I think, I suppose the real lesson from all of this is, you know, as an industry, I think we really need to kind of stop taking responsibility ourselves to get things right, you know, from beginning to end. We need to actually begin to a process whereby we pull clients in to that process, so they're actually part of that decision-making process along with us. So by the time we get to that point when we get to needing to do post-occupancy, that there are no more surprises left. That all we're finding is that we've actually, this is what you asked for, this is what you've got. But that's absolutely not where we are at this particular minute in time. And for that to happen, we do need to change the industry. I mean, essentially, we do need that culture change.
We need change, exactly. And then maybe, Chris, final word to you, picking up some of the threads of what we've been saying. You talked about obviously wanting to have those early doors conversations, wanting those bespoke solutions, and if I could ask you, obviously there are standards, there are certificates, you've got the stripes on the arm, the badges, you've got the necessary paperwork. But what are you able to promise and pitch in those earlier conversations about how you're going to deliver, how your solution is going to deliver, and how you're going to de-risk it? What can you offer over and above the usual certificates, which, you know, potentially others have too? What can you bring early doors in terms of promises that you can deliver on?
Well, I think the most important thing ultimately is conversation and understanding what it is the client and the specifier are looking for in the specific project. And it varies project by project, obviously, but the nature of what Viga do and the products and innovations that Viga supply into the market are designed to simplify processes, are designed to make them safer, designed to make them more hygienic and more efficient. And depending on what the contractor or the client, the specifier is looking for, then we would try and tailor the solution to that project. And I think it varies project by project, but ultimately we have a range of proven solutions that have been on the market for many, many years, and we continue to improve based on customer feedback and installer feedback. So it varies, but as I said, there are the proven technologies and there are improvements upon those that have been proven to work for many years.
Excellent. And kind of lastly, perhaps just ask you, are you having more of those conversations that you want? Is that because they're more receptive, or, to be blunt, are you getting better at getting into those conversations?
I think yes, I think I can only speak on behalf of Viga, but we put a huge amount of importance on focusing on the specification end of the design of the project process, whereas Other manufacturers may look at the back end of the project and target the contractor. It's a huge amount of importance. It's the reason I work for the business, is to have those conversations at early design stage. And the more projects that we prove successful implementation of those innovations mean that specifiers and clients are more open to having those conversations again and working with us and collaborating with us.
Exactly. It's a virtuous spiral, isn't it? You know, so right, well, there we are. We are just about out of time now. Thank you very much. So a big thank you to all our panelists, of course, Zainab, Eddie and Chris from sponsors Viga. Also to yourselves out in Zoom land, on Twitter, LinkedIn, everywhere else for your comments and questions. A reminder to check out elementalexpo.com, the online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. Find a full diary of events on the website, as I said at the start. There's some great webinars coming up, a couple at the end of this week, one on decarbonisation, one on digitalisation, both on Friday, and the back catalogue, all free to watch on demand, as I said. So thank you very much, panel. That's it for today. I've been Jim McClelland, editor at SUSMeme. Thanks for watching. See you all again soon. Thank you very much.